Wildlife jump outs. So for those who might not be familiar with wildlife jump outs, they basically are placed inside fenced right-of-ways to allow animals, large mammals typically, to escape the fenced right-of-way if they end up in between them. Of course, the best solution is not to have the animals getting the fenced right-of-way to begin with. Joe mentioned the fence end, right? Where do we put them? How do we treat fence ends? That is really the starting point. But that's not the topic of today's conversation here. This is about wildlife jump outs and how to make them function better. The jump outs that are part of this study are in the Highway 93 area. We'll visit these jump outs, at least some of them, tomorrow, and we'll specifically mention the Evero area and Ravalli Hill area. Evero, predominantly white-tailed deer, and Ravalli Hill, predominantly mule deer. So we're looking at wildlife jump outs and their effectiveness for two different deer species. Now, in the past, we have actually monitored these jump outs first through tracking and then later with wildlife cameras. 10 of them were equipped with a wildlife camera. Based on those historic data, 10 jump outs, 32% of the mule deer that showed up on top of a jump out, one of these 10, jumped down to safety, meaning 2 out of 3 basically said no thank you and stayed longer in the right of way, which is not necessarily what we want because then they run increased risk by staying longer or being hit by traffic. For white-tailed deer, it was even worse. Only 7% of the ones showing up on top jumped down. The jump outs that were measured are listed with their individual heights in the lower right. So we conducted an experiment assisted by MDT, maintenance personnel and their equipment to lower these exact same 10 jump outs that we monitored years ago with these cameras and lowered them to exactly 5 feet. The vertical face was 5 feet. We then equipped a bar on top of these wildlife jump outs with the idea that animals wanting to jump out can step over a bar, take advantage of the lower jump out height, 5 feet. But if animals are on the habitat side of the fence, they would have to clear that bar as well. So we're basically trying to play with the ratio, make it more likely that animals would exit the right of way by jumping down, while maintaining a high degree of difficulty for animals wanting to jump up into the right of way. First, a prototype built out of wood. I didn't really know what I was doing, but that turned out to be a good thing. So built this out of wood and was able to construct it on site and just decided on a setback from the wall of 4 inches, thinking, well, there's enough place for a hoof to be placed there. And I didn't want to set it back too far because I didn't want to provide an opportunity for animals jumping up, landing before the bar, because otherwise the bar has no function, right? Well, the animals showed us what was really happening, and instead of stepping over the bar, they were flying over the bar. And this means that they're in effect having a jump out height of 6.5 feet, right? This is where we were to begin with, and that wasn't really working very well. So this basically set us on a path, also assisted by the final material of choice, metal bar, rebar, which we basically bent giant staples and with corner pieces, and it was able to work very flexible in the field. Because these center blocks that make up the vertical wall, I can't pound the rebar through those center blocks. I had to have the setback of 12 inches. So we increased the setback, but it kept the height at 18 inches though. And it's quite dark, but there is a mule deer there, and a sequence of images will show that it approaches and steps over the bar, even with 3 legs and potentially even 4 before it jumps down. So that is really the behavior that we were after. And we achieved that, at least sometimes, when we increased the setback from 4 inches to 12 inches. So we had the prototype, height 18 inches and setback of 4 inches. And the remainder 9 of the wildlife jump outs were equipped with these rebar pieces. Eventually, we replaced the prototype also with rebar, but I collected first enough data together with Sam to make sure I had a good sample size with the 4-inch setback. And then we had a further split because we're still not happy with what we saw. Half of the jump outs kept that height of 18 inches, but had an even greater setback, 12 to 15 inches. And the other half, we reduced the height to 15 inches, but we kept the same setback. Now, overall, we had a range of different species that we observed either on top or at the bottom of these wildlife jump outs. I won't go through all of them. I'll just focus on the two deer species. First line, white-tailed deer, circled in red. 5.5% of the ones showing up on top jumped down. Compare that to the 7% that we had with unmodified jump outs. There's no improvement, and you could argue is making the situation slightly worse, right? So that's not good at all. For mule deer, overall, the modified jump outs had 64% of the animals on top jump down. So that is a doubling from 32%. So that is great news, at least for the mule deer. Now, when we look in detail for the different treatments for white-tailed deer, it doesn't really matter what treatment we had. The performance was dismal. We want a high percentage of these animals that show up on top to jump down, and that is the dark bars, but they're all below 10% or so. So it didn't really matter what this treatment was. None of them performed, I think, to our satisfaction, to what we would like to see, maybe 2 out of 3. There's a subjective criterion, but we want to see more than 10%. I think we can all agree on that. And there were no animals jumping up. There's no open bars that would have shown that. When we look at the different treatments for mule deer, we know overall 64% on top jumped down, but the height and the setback, or specifically the setback, mattered a lot. When we increased the setback from 4 to 12 and then to 15 inches, we had a consistent improvement of mule deer being able to jump down. The last treatment, height 15, setback 12, we just don't have enough sample size, at least not at the time when we summarized the data. Now, the best performing combination is height of 18, setback 15 inches was a good enough sample size, 56 animals. There were also some animals that jumped up, and that's the open bar that you see over there. Here's an illustration of an animal jumping up. And as you see, they did not land in front of that bar, right? They clear that bar. Right. So in effect, this animal is jumping 6.5 feet. So we did a quick calculation about the balance because we don't want to have animals jump up. But if we have an even greater number of animals being able to escape the right-of-way, you might still have a positive balance. And that's exactly what we had. So, by being twice as effective overall, we had 26 more animals escape the right-of-way while only 5 jumped up. So that's a net benefit of 21 individuals that would have otherwise stayed in the right-of-way for longer. So I think that's the way to look at it. Not be too nervous about animals jumping up. It's about striking that balance and getting to a net benefit. And then more specific data summary for the events that allowed it, where we had the images that would allow us to see, do the animals step over that bar before they jump down? We basically tallied that for the 2 species and across the 4 different treatments. And it basically suggests that, stepping over that bar is critical and increases the likelihood of them jumping down, because now they can actually take advantage of the lower height, right? Step over that bar and you effectively have a height of only 5 feet rather than 6.5 feet if you have to clear that bar as well. Now, what are the conclusions for white-tailed deer? Unfortunately, with the treatments that we have so far, there has been no improvement whatsoever. And we do know that we have a problem. Only 5 or 7% of the animals on top jump down. And we implement these wildlife jump outs all over the place, not only in North America, but also beyond. And we mostly believe that these wildlife jump outs function. We just built them and we ask a few people, how high should that be? And then that it get built to that height or more or less. But it's only when you start measuring that you find out, I don't think this is good enough, right? So I think we really have to continue measurements, especially for white-tailed deer. We're out of time and money for this project, but I have a general call to you and maybe also to others. if you know of a funding source, we have the lower jump outs, we have the experimental design, we are here, the jump outs are here, and I would love to continue the experiments by lowering that bar further, greater setback. And it may be that for white-tailed deer, when we eventually remove the rebar and have no bar on top, that you still find that the white-tailed deer do not jump down in a high enough percentage. It may be that even 5 feet is still too high for white-tailed deer to jump down, but we have to gradually go there, not start off with a lower height because of the risk of animals jumping up into the road corridor. For mule deer, I think we're very good. 4 out of 5 mule deer with one treatment are now jumping down. I think we can agree that that is a pretty good performance. But for white-tailed deer, we really have to improve.